With so much wrong with the world, more and more people want to find out about the ideas of socialism. Faced with racism, climate change, inequality, cuts to jobs and services, the pressures on people's mental and physical health, and much more, people are drawn towards socialism by the idea that things don't have to be like this, that we must be able to build a better society. In this short talk, originally prepared for young people in the Lancashire Socialist Party, I hope I can describe at least in outline how socialism, and in particular Marxism, the theory that explains socialism, sets out why the world under the present way of running things, capitalism, is so unfair and unequal, because it is a system that works through a small group of people getting richer at the expense of the majority. And as Oxfam show, 2,000 billionaires own as much as the poorest 4 billion people. That's what socialists campaign to change. Now, there are lots of different ways of describing socialism, and different kinds of people who describe themselves as socialists. And you can see a few different definitions written out on the screen here. Now, some opponents would describe all of us as utopians, as dreamers, who are never going to overcome what they would say is human nature. Now, I'd say there's nothing wrong with having hopes and dreams. But actually, yes, there is some truth in the criticism, because socialism isn't going to be built just by hoping everyone will agree that we need to be nice to each other. If you take this first description of someone calling themselves a democratic socialist, then I think actually it probably is a bit utopian, a bit of a dream. Because yes, I think we'd all agree that the super rich, the multimillionaires, should pay more tax. But it's a dream to think that they're going to willingly pay up. Socialists are always in the leadership when it comes to winning campaigns. Like when we in the Socialist Party twice defeated even mighty Thatcher, organising mass non-payment to stop the poll tax and forcing them to hand over money to allow Liverpool Council to build council homes, nurseries and sports centres. Those victories back in the 80s and 90s. But we always understood that trying to permanently expect big business to act fairly and provide for housing, hospitals, schools, etc. out of their profits is a dream. Capitalism just doesn't work that way. It only works to make a profit. And that's why I think real socialists, scientific socialists if you like, who have analysed how capitalism works, have always explained that those big corporations have to be taken off the hands of individual capitalist owners and owned and managed by people as a whole. And for years the Labour Party card had that kind of commitment on it to common ownership until Blair got rid of that clause. And in the Socialist Party, we say that we stand for the public ownership of the top 150 companies and banks. That way, with those under public ownership, society could plan what we produce for the benefit of the overwhelming majority, not just a few. And that is socialism. Now, Marxism, the science of socialism, if you like any subject, needs studying and discussing, and there's always more to learn. But Marx, in outline, along with others, worked out that socialism isn't needed just because capitalism is unjust and unequal, but because capitalism is a system that can't take society forwards anymore like it once did. Because yes, compared to the medieval society it replaced, capitalism allowed technology and living standards to develop enormously, although of course not shared out for all of the world's people. Instead of everyone just producing goods for their own use, with their own individual tools and plots of land and so on, capitalism saw a few individuals get others to work together to produce much, much more through the factories and machinery that these individual capitalists owned, and then they try and sell these goods to make a profit. So from most being poor, with very little to share out, capitalism allowed a lot more to be made. But it wasn't shared out. It was the owners who took control of what was produced.
But capitalism has a problem, and a problem it can't solve. The main market to buy all the things that are produced by the capitalists are the workers themselves. But the capitalists don't pay the working class enough to buy back all the goods they've made. So the capitalist system always faces a crisis. In boom times, the wheels of production get going and it moves forward. But then crisis occurs and it has to move into reverse until it can start to go forward again. At the beginning of capitalism, and in the good times, the booms would be bigger than the slumps, and capitalism would move generally upward. But now we're in a period of decline where weak booms are replaced by greater slumps. And there's another one coming, made worse by COVID. The capitalists also have to compete with other capitalists to grab their share of the market. And over time, smaller businesses get pushed out of business by bigger ones, and wealth gets concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. So we now see the world dominated by a small number of big corporations. But competition for private profit means they can't plan together. Socialism is needed for that to happen worldwide. Capitalism is also built on individual competing nations. And when things are going well, they try and get along and trade together. But when things get tough, they resort to trade wars, like the one that's taking place now between the USA and China, or of course even actual wars. They can never work together to plan what's actually needed to meet needs across the globe. And that's one reason why capitalism will never solve a global problem like climate change either. Socialism, public ownership and democratic planning of the economy is the way to resolve those contradictions of capitalism. Instead of a system that only produces things if they can be sold for a profit and throws millions into unemployment and closes factories when they can't, socialism says, let's plan the world's resources so that we produce to meet needs. Doing so would make instant savings on not having to make pointless adverts and produce pointless luxury goods, on not having to spend billions on the arms trade and warfare, above all, on not having the waste from factories and other workplaces being closed when they could be open, and also from having competing factories producing the same thing or slightly different versions of the same thing, instead of adjusting output to meet a democratic plan. Yes, that doesn't mean everything has to be identical, but that the choices would be decided by input from democratic planning and management from ordinary people, instead of having lots of different versions being produced by competing private companies. Now, there's a last couple of arguments that are always going to be thrown up against yourself if you're a socialist. The first one is going to be along the lines of, what about Russia? Or socialism always ends up in a dictatorship. Now that needs a longer discussion. But in brief, just like Tony Blair pretended that he stood for the traditions of the Labour Party, while actually removing that Socialist Clause 4 that was on the Labour Party card and got rid of the old traditions of the Labour Party, then in Russia, Stalin and the privileged bureaucrats that took control pretended to be standing for socialism, when actually they turned their back on what the Russian revolutionary leaders like Lenin and Trotsky really stood for. As you can see on the photographs, the Stalinists discovered that you could remove people from photographs, remove people from history, long before Photoshop was invented. and to rewrite history to suit what suited yourself. Now, they only got away with it because Russia was a very poor country and the revolution was also very isolated. We'd say that the links today across the world of trade, the internet and other communications mean that it would be much harder to isolate a revolution. Just look how the Black Lives Matter protests spread worldwide after the murder of George Floyd. If one country moves towards socialism, others can quickly follow too. Although, of course, we need those international links between workers and socialist organisations across the world. But yes, we also need safeguards to make sure real democracy is in place. And if Stalin had really stood for what Lenin really stood for, then they would have listened to Lenin's words, because real socialist democracy means not just electing somebody every now and again to be your MP or your councillor, but that you would elect the person into whatever position it was. They would be subject to the right of recall at any time. If people felt that that representative was no longer doing the right thing, they could replace them through an election and put somebody else in their place. In fact, everybody should be in a position where they could become that local elected person, so that, in Lenin's words, if everybody becomes a bureaucrat, then nobody is able to become a bureaucrat. Everybody is involved in workers' control and supervision. And to be absolutely sure, then there should be no privileges for getting that office. You choose somebody because they're the best, and they stay in that place because they're best. They represent people as they want to be represented. They don't get privileges for it. Their pay does not exceed those of the pay of working people around them. But another argument that's going to be thrown at any socialist is the idea that it's just a dream, that capitalism is too powerful, that they'll never allow it. And so I haven't gone for one of the great Marxist leaders, but a great trade union leader nevertheless, Bob Crow, who gave this answer in his own colourful language. Because yes, to take that wealth from a few and put it in the hands of the many will need us to be well organised. The big corporations, who may be happy to allow us to vote for a choice of candidates that don't threaten their system every now and again, they certainly won't actually like the idea that the majority be allowed to really control how society is run instead of them. Look how much dirt was thrown even at Jeremy Corbyn, for example. So yes, they'll try and use the media, the anti-union laws, the control of the banks and the finance system, and if needs be, the police, and even, as we've seen in some parts of the world, the army, to try and defeat socialist governments. But as Bob Crow puts it, there's a lot more of us than there is of them. Socialism is about the overwhelming majority taking control back from a small minority. So if properly organised, a few thousand billionaires won't be able to stop the billions changing the world. But of course they know that. That's why capitalism uses every means at its disposal to keep the workers divided instead of organised together. Racism, sexism, nationalism, homophobia, religious divides, anything that it can to keep us apart. We have to build workers' unity in order to build socialism together. But last of all, how do we get from where we are now to a socialist world? Well, yes, we need to learn and study Marxism. But theory is only useful if it's put into practice. That's why we need a programme, a set of demands that friends and workmates can relate to and can campaign around, as for example we've put together in the Socialist Charter for young people. But we also need a party, like the Socialist Party, to organise people together and to give leadership to the struggle. If you want to find out more about socialism, then the best thing you can do is get in touch with the Socialist Party.
Have a look on www.socialistparty.org.uk, or if you're not in England and Wales, have a look at socialistworld.net. Read the materials that are there. Have a look through our books like Socialism in the 21st Century, or some of the Marxist classics like Engels's Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. But don't just read them on your own. Get in touch with others through the Socialist Party and discuss them together. And even better, join with us in the Socialist Party. But don't just read and join, get organised. Find campaigns and get involved around issues that you and your friends and workmates can relate to, and let's together build a socialist world.